This is Bleeding Heart Yard, which featured prominently in Dickens' novel Little Dorrit. Here resides the delightful Plornish family. Here works that great inventor Daniel Doyce and his faithful accountant Arthur Clennam, Amy Dorrit's friend and protector. Here is where Mr. Panks, harmless yet tenacious, makes his rounds collecting what little he can of the overdue rents. But in Bleeding Heart Yard, even though the tenants were always in debt, they were never unhappy. Though the residents make themselves victims of unscrupulous landlords and speculative creditors, they never mind so long as they have faithful friends warming their cold hearths with warm hearts. The name Bleeding Heart most likely derived from an eponymous 16th century inn that bore a sign of the Virgin Mary, whose heart was pierced with 5 swords. A more interesting legend is the place where a wealthy aristocratic lady was torn limb from limb, with only her heart continuing to pump blood. This is where Fagin brings Jack Dawkins, otherwise known as the Artful Dodger in Oliver Twist, and meets with him in secret here, along with Nancy and Bill Sikes. And this is where the Artful Dodger, here at the Three Cripples, now called the One Ton Pub, brings Oliver for the first time after he bumps into him accidentally at the beginning of the novel. And this is also where Charles Dickens actually ate and drank. Here at the One Ton Pub, his inspiration for the Three Cripples in Oliver Twist. In 2016, the TV series Dickensian had many of Dickens' characters converge at the Three Cripples Inn, particularly Mrs. Gamp, who was always downing shots of gin, Fagin, Nancy, Bill Sikes, Detective Bucket, Scrooge, Mrs. Cratchit, and Silas Wegg, who in the series is the bartender. I'm walking down Saffron Hill. This was one of the poorest sections in 19th century London, and this is where Fagin's lair was, or Fagin's den in Oliver Twist. And this is where he taught the Artful Dodger, and he taught Oliver how to pickpocket handkerchiefs. Now, this is a very narrow alley, and if you look up you can see how tall the buildings are. And if you can just imagine old, rickety, broken down wooden structures built up here about this high, and Fagin's would have been way up at the top, and he had to climb up really rickety staircases to get up to his lair or his den. And this was a squalid, dirty, filthy, smelly, stinking place. And Fagin, of course, drags Oliver here against his will and teaches him the art of fencing along with Jack Dawkins. So you can kind of get, of course, there's modern buildings here, but you can kind of get a sense of how narrow the street was and how enclosed everything felt. So this was Fagin's den or Fagin's lair from Oliver Twist. In the 1800s, these slums were known as rookeries. Dickens described Saffron Hill through Oliver's eyes. Quote, "A dirtier or more wretched place he had never seen. The street was very narrow and muddy, and the air was impregnated with filthy odors. There were a good many small shops, but the only stock in trade appeared to be heaps of children, who, even at that time of night, were crawling in and out at the doors, or screaming from the inside. The sole places that seemed to prosper amid the general blight of the place were the public houses. Covered ways and yards disclosed little knots of houses where drunken men and women were positively wallowing in filth." In Dickens' novel Nicholas Nickleby, the evil schoolmaster Squeers stays at the Saracen's Head here in Snow's Hill. This is the Saracen's Head behind me, most likely named after the original, where Wackford Squeers, the evil schoolmaster, stayed when he was rounding up unsuspecting boys and their parents and toting them off to his school, where he was not a teacher, He was just an evil taskmaster, basically who forced the students to work. This is where Nicholas Nickleby had to be a student and later escaped. Unfortunately, after the crippled and abused Smike, Squeers' lackey, runs away from Dotheboys Hall, where Nicholas is employed as a teaching assistant, Smike is quickly apprehended. Fortunately, Nicholas saves Smike from Squeers' wrath by fleeing with him to London. Unfortunately, Squeers kidnaps Smike again and locks him up at the Saracen's Head here on Snow's Hill. Fortunately, the sympathetic John Brodie, who is Squeers' neighbor and has always hated him, happens to be in London and is able to distract Squeers' attention in order to get into Smike's room, sneak him out the window and down the stairs. Unfortunately, Smike dies at the end of the novel.